For 100 years, the Sol system was a graveyard. No signals, no ships. The galaxy thought humanity was dead, a forgotten footnote of a failed species. They were wrong. We weren't dead. We were just busy. And when the silence finally broke, it shattered the universe. The history books of the greater galaxy recorded the events of 2042 with bureaucratic indifference. It was categorized as a standard subjugation. When the Trellian ascendancy first appeared in the skies of Earth, they did not come with open arms, mathematical equations of peace, or promises of a utopian alliance. They arrived with a fleet of dreadnoughts that blotted out the sun, casting long, terrifying shadows over a world still divided by its own petty borders. The Trellians were an apex civilization, a founding member of the Galactic Concordat, and they operated on a simple philosophy. The universe belonged to the strong, and the weak paid rent. Humanity, naturally, fought back. It was a brief, brutal, and utterly futile resistance. The combined arsenals of Earth, nuclear, biological, and conventional were swatted away like dust. In response to a coordinated strike by the United States and Allied forces, the Trellians demonstrated their power. They didn't target military bases. They targeted geography. A single kinetic rod, dropped from high orbit, struck the mid-Atlantic ridge. The resulting tsunamis and tectonic shifts wiped out 2 billion lives in 48 hours. Facing total extinction, the leaders of Earth unconditionally surrendered. The terms were absolute. Earth was stripped of its heavy metals, its advanced aerospace prototypes, and its dignity. The Trellians established a brutal perimeter, declaring the Sol system a quarantined resource preserve. Humanity was forbidden from developing faster-than-light travel, forbidden from leaving their solar system, and ordered to pay a tithe of raw materials every decade. Then, the Trellians left, leaving behind a network of automated orbital sentinels to ensure compliance. They expected humanity to regress into a pre-industrial dark age, fighting over the scraps of a broken world. They fundamentally misunderstood the human psychological profile. We did not regress. We unified. The trauma of losing 2 billion people did not break our spirit. It forged it into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly focused. By 2050, the remnants of the world's governments dissolved into the United Terran Directorate. The public face of Earth remained pitiful, a struggling, scarred planet slowly trying to rebuild its agriculture. But beneath the surface, quite literally, a different story was unfolding. The greatest minds from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, Boeing's Phantom Works, General Dynamics, and BAE Systems were brought together under a heavily expanded black-budget DARPA initiative. Their mandate was singular: survive, adapt, and prepare. In 2060, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a brilliant quantum physicist whose family had been washed away in the Atlantic tsunamis, finalized the design for the Aegis protocol. It was a localized space-time distortion field powered by a heavily modified fusion reactor array. To the Trellian orbital sentinels and any alien scopes pointed at Earth, the Aegis shroud projected a false reality. It showed a planet choked by ash, cities in ruins, and primitive radio signals. Behind the shroud, humanity disappeared into the dark. For a century, we stayed completely silent. We stopped broadcasting outward. We pulled our satellites into low, hidden orbits. The surface of Earth was essentially abandoned, given back to nature, while billions moved into vast subterranean arcologies. In the dark, the industrial machine roared to life. It was a total war economy that lasted 100 years. Every child born was taught the history of the Great Humiliation. Every ounce of intellectual capital was poured into physics, materials, science, and military strategy. We didn't just study the wreckage of the few Trellian drones we managed to capture. We reverse-engineered them, found their flaws, and completely bypassed their technological tree. We hollowed out the moon. From the outside, Luna looked exactly as it always had: a dead, cratered rock. Inside, it was the largest supercomputer and command nexus ever constructed, acting as the brain for a heavily automated defense grid. Mars was transformed by General Dynamics into a planetary-scale shipyard. Because we didn't have to worry about atmospheric constraints or public opinion, we strip-mined the asteroid belt using automated drones, funneling trillions of tons of iron, titanium, and rare earth metals directly into the Martian forges. We built a fleet. Not a fleet designed for exploration or trade, or diplomacy. We built a fleet designed purely for omnicide. The ships were ugly, brutalist wedges of dark matter-infused armor, armed with singularity collapse warheads and phase-shift railguns technology that the Galactic Concordat had outlawed for being too destructive. Through it all, we remained perfectly, absolutely silent. Generations lived and died underground, their entire existences dedicated to a war they would never see, passing the torch to their children. By the year 2142, exactly 100 years after first contact, Fleet Admiral Gregory Pierce sat in the Lunar Command Center. He was a man with cold, calculating eyes, carrying the weight of a century of suppressed human rage. He stared at the tactical holographic projection of the Sol system. The wait was over. The trap was set. All they needed was a spark. The Trellian ascendancy had grown complacent. In the century since they had subjugated Earth, their empire had expanded, their wealth had multiplied, and their arrogance had become absolute. To them, the Sol system was nothing more than a forgotten ledger entry, a dead system inhabited by a broken species that hadn't been heard from in generations. Supreme Commander Vexok of the Trellian Fourth Armada was an ambitious, ruthlessly political officer. He was looking for a cheap, highly publicized victory to secure his seat on the Concordat High Council. The Sol system, with its supposedly docile primate population and untapped gas giants, seemed like the perfect target. Vexok proposed a total annexation of Sol, intending to wipe out whatever primitive remnants of humanity still survived and claim the system entirely for his noble house. His armada was a terrifying display of force. 300 capital dreadnoughts, shimmering with sleek biological metallic armor, powered by captured star cores. It was a fleet capable of glassing continents in a matter of minutes. Accompanied by thousands of support frigates and broadcast ships, Vexok intended to live-stream the annexation to the entire Galactic Concordat, a brutal reality show of Trellan supremacy. In late 2142, the Trellan Armada breached the Oort cloud, crossing into human space. In the Lunar Command Center, alarms that had been silent for a century suddenly flared to life. Red tactical runes cascaded across the obsidian glass of the central holotable. Incursion detected. The cold, synthetic voice of the central AI announced, Trellian signatures, 300 capital class, course set for Earth. Admiral Pierce stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. Around him, hundreds of officers, the elite of the Terran Directorate, froze. Their hearts pounded, a century of genetic and cultural conditioning screaming at them to open fire, to unleash hell. Maintain silence, Pierce ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Keep the Aegis Shroud active. Let them come closer. Commander Vexok's fleet glided past Pluto, their sensors sweeping the dark. The false projections of the Aegis Shroud fed them exactly what they expected to see. Dead space, a few pieces of floating debris, and silence. As they approached Neptune, a Trellan destroyer picked up a faint, anomalous heat signature near the moon of Triton. It was an old, automated mining rig, left over from the early days of the Black Budget expansion, deliberately left unshielded as bait. Without warning, Vexok ordered the destroyer to fire. A lance of concentrated plasma crossed the void, striking the rig. The human installation vaporized in a silent, brilliant flash of light. In the command center, Captain James Lawson, Pierce's second-in-command, gripped the edge of his console. "Sir, they just destroyed Outpost Echo. We have a clear firing solution. The Martian defense grid is spooled. We can turn their vanguard to slag right now." "No," Pierce said, his eyes tracking the red blips moving deeper into the system. "If we hit them now..." The Concordat writes it off as an anomaly, a rogue defense system. "We need the galaxy to see exactly what happens here." We wait. The psychological toll in that room was immense. For 3 days, the human military watched as the Trellan Armada casually moved through their solar system. Vexok, emboldened by the lack of resistance, began a system-wide broadcast on all open galactic frequencies. Billions of alien citizens across the Orion Arm tuned in. "Citizens of the Concordat," Vexok's voice sneered, translated by human AI in real time. "Behold, the Sol system." A century ago, the Trellan Ascendancy brought order to this chaotic, primitive world. Now, we return to claim what is rightfully ours. If the natives of this system still draw breath, Let this be a lesson. Resistance to the ascendancy is erasure. To emphasize his point, Vexok ordered his fleet to test their weapons on Jupiter's moons. In a display of horrific casual violence, they bombarded Ganymede, cracking its icy crust and boiling its subsurface oceans into space. "Admiral," Lawson whispered, his voice shaking with suppressed fury, "they are glassing our backyard. The men are ready. The fleet is begging for the leash to be cut." "Patience, James," Pierce replied, his jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. "They need to cross the Rubicon. They need to put a gun to Earth's head. The galaxy must see them as the executioners, so they cannot complain when we become the butchers." Finally, the Trellian Armada entered Earth orbit. Through the Aegis Shroud, Vexok saw a ruined, silent blue marble. He positioned his 300 dreadnoughts in a tightening orbital blockade, aiming their main planetary siege cannons directly at the surface. Vexok opened a planetary channel, broadcasting not just to Earth, but lived to the watching Galactic Concordat. "To whatever miserable remnants of humanity still hide in the dirt," Vexok boomed, his reptilian features projected onto the global hollow feed. "Your existence is an offense to the ascendancy. You have one solar cycle to broadcast your unconditional, total surrender. You will offer yourselves as indentured labor, or we will ignite your atmosphere and turn your world into a cinder. Submit or burn." The galaxy watched in hushed anticipation. The Concordat Senate, observing the feed from light years away, expected what always happened: silence, followed by annihilation, or the pathetic, weeping pleas of a broken species begging for their lives. Instead, a communications channel snapped open. It wasn't a weak, static-filled radio burst. It was a terrifyingly powerful quantum-entangled signal that violently hijacked the Trellian broadcast network, overriding their encryption in a fraction of a second. The feed of the ruined Earth vanished from the galactic screens. In its place appeared Fleet Admiral Gregory Pierce. He was sitting in the Lunar Command Center, surrounded by the sleek, dark, ultra-advanced architecture of human engineering. He did not look like a survivor crawling out of the dirt. He looked like a grim reaper in a tailored uniform. Vexok recoiled in his command chair, momentarily stunned by the sheer clarity and power of the human transmission. What is this? Who are... Pierce didn't let him finish. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing through the void, addressing not just Vexok, but the trillions of alien souls watching across the galaxy. "For 100 years, Pierce said, his voice cold, steady, and echoing with the acoustic perfection of a predator cornering its prey, you told us we were defeated. You told us to stay in the dark. We listened. We stayed in the dark. And we built." Pierce leaned forward. "You want our response, Commander Vexok? You want to know if humanity submit?" The entire human military network, spread across Earth, the hollowed-out moon, the shipyards of Mars, and the asteroid belt, synced to a single master command code. Pierce narrowed his eyes. He spoke a single word: uncage. The word hung in the digital void for exactly 0.2 seconds. Then, the physics of the Sol system fundamentally changed. The Aegis Shroud, the massive holographic camouflage that had hidden humanity's progress for a century, dropped. The illusion of a ruined, dead Earth dissolved in an instant. In its place, the Trellian Armada found themselves staring down the barrel of a fully militarized, heavily fortified fortress world. Vast orbital defense rings, bristling with weaponry the Concordat hadn't even conceptualized, encircled the planet like an angry halo. But that was only the beginning. On the surface of the moon, the massive crater of Tycho split open. The lunar crust, engineered over decades by the descendants of General Dynamics and DARPA, retracted. From the deep, abyssal hangars of the lunar core, humanity's black fleet ascended. There were no sleek, aerodynamic designs, no glowing, elegant nacelles. The Terran dreadnoughts were jagged, brutal leviathans of dark matter composite armor, built around spinal-mounted phase shift cannons. They poured out of the moon, rising from Mars, and dropping stealth camouflage from the asteroid belt. In a matter of seconds, the tactical displays on Commander Vexok's flagship turned from a confident, empty green to a terrifying, blinding crimson. Where there had been 300 Trellan ships, there were now over 5,000 Terran warships locking onto them. Panic erupted on the Trellian bridge. "Commander!" A sensor officer screamed, his voice cracking. Power spikes! Massive power spikes! They aren't using fusion! They're, by the gods, they are weaponizing localized singularities. Vexok's arrogance shattered, replaced by cold, paralyzing terror. He tried to speak, tried to order a retreat, but the human fleet did not give them time for diplomacy. They had waited 100 years to pull the trigger. They were not going to waste another second. Admiral Pierce, still broadcasting live to the shocked Galactic Senate, didn't say another word. He just watched. The human flagship, the Times U, TS, Vengeance, fired first. It didn't shoot a beam of light or a plasma bolt. It fired a phase-shift kinetic slug, a solid block of super-dense tungsten accelerated to 99% the speed of light. Because the slug was phase-shifted, it bypassed the Trellian Dreadnought's deflector shields entirely, phasing back into normal space at the exact moment it intersected with the enemy ship's hull. The kinetic energy release was catastrophic. The Trellian Dreadnought, a marvel of alien engineering, didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, atomized into a cloud of expanding plasma so violently that the shockwave shattered the armor of the two ships adjacent to it. Fire at will, Captain Lawson commanded from the human tactical pit. The dark space around Earth lit up with the wrath of a century. The slaughter was absolute, a masterclass in asymmetrical overkill. Human AI targeting systems, trained for decades in hyper-realistic simulations, dissected the Trellian fleet with surgical precision. Swarms of autonomous drones, developed from old Boeing Black projects, latched onto the alien frigates, burrowing through their armor and detonating from the inside out. Vexok watched his invincible armada disintegrate. His capital ships, the pride of the Ascendancy, were popping like glass bulbs. "Evasive maneuvers!" Vexok shrieked, slamming his fists onto his console. "Initiate FTL jump! Get us out of this system!" "We can't!" His navigator howled back, sparks raining down from the burning ceiling. "They've locked the dimensional plane! The entire solar system is trapped in a localized gravity well! We are caged!" That was the true genius of Dr. Evelyn Shaw's engineering. The Aegis protocol wasn't just a shield, it was a snare. The moment Pierce said uncage, the field had reversed, projecting a hyperdense gravity shadow around the Sol system. Nothing could warp out. The Trellians were locked in a room with the monster they had created. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings watched the live broadcast in absolute, horrified silence. The High Council of the Chincordat, sitting in their grand crystalline chambers light years away, stood frozen. They were watching an apex predator, a species they had written off as dead, completely dismantle a dominant galactic military force in less than 4 minutes. On the bridge of Vexok's flagship, the final moments were chaotic. The ship was venting atmosphere. Warning klaxons blared a death dirge. Out the massive viewport, Vexok saw a Terran dreadnought maneuver alongside his burning vessel. It was so massive, it blocked out the sun. A tight beam transmission forced its way into the Trellian bridge. Admiral Pierce's face appeared one last time. "You came to claim our world, Vexok," Pierce said coldly. "Instead, you have simply provided us with the coordinates to yours." The human ship fired. Vexok's flagship was sheared in half. In exactly 6 minutes and 42 seconds, the Battle of Sol was over. 300 Trellian ships had entered the system. Not a single one survived. The orbital space around Earth was a graveyard of alien debris, floating silently in the cold vacuum. In the Lunar Command Center, there was no cheering. There was no celebration. The men and women of the Terran Directorate simply analyzed the telemetry, their faces illuminated by the pale light of the tactical displays. They had executed their primary directive perfectly. But the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Admiral Pierce turned to his comms officer. The galactic broadcast was still live. The entire universe was still watching, holding its breath, terrified of what the humans would do next. "Leave the channel open," Pierce ordered. He stepped back up to the transmitter. He looked out at the stars, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. To the Galactic Concordat, Pierce's voice rang out, cold and unyielding. 100 years ago, you dictated the terms of our existence. You dropped fire on our homes and told us to learn our place in your universe. We have learned it." Behind Pierce, the tactical map shifted. The massive human fleet, thousands of black wedges, began to realign. Their engines flared, burning a brilliant, furious blue. Our quarantine is over, Pierce said. We are leaving our system. If you stay out of our way, you will survive. If you stand with the Trellian ascendancy, you will burn with them. We do not forgive. We do not forget. And we are coming. The transmission cut to black. In the high chambers of the Galactic Concordat, panic finally broke the silence. Senators screamed, diplomats collapsed, and military commanders scrambled to analyze the data they had just witnessed. They realized, far too late, the catastrophic mistake they had made. They hadn't buried humanity a century ago. They had planted them. And in the dark, under the immense pressure of grief and rage, humanity had grown into something that would tear the galaxy apart. The century of silence was over. The greatest war in galactic history had just begun. The silence that followed the Battle of Sol was not one of peace. It was the deafening, suffocating pause of a drawn breath before a scream. For the first time in 100 years, humanity was not hiding. The Aegis Shroud was deactivated, its massive orbital emitters powering down to redirect their fusion output into the fleet's star drives. The Sol system was a hive of terrifying activity, visible to any long-range sensor in the galaxy. Thousands of dreadnoughts, heavy cruisers, and drone carriers held their positions in low Earth orbit, forming a wall of black matter composite armor that blotted out the stars. In the Lunar Command Center, Fleet Admiral Gregory Pierce observed the tactical overlay of the Orion Arm. The galaxy was no longer a mystery, it was a map of targets. Admiral Captain James Lawson said, stepping onto the command dais. All ships report green. The Shaw entanglement drives are spooled and synchronized. General Winston's mechanized infantry divisions are locked in their drop bays. We are ready to jump. Pierce nodded slowly. He looked at Dr. Evelyn Shaw, the architect of humanity's survival, who was monitoring the quantum telemetry from a nearby terminal. Her face was illuminated by the pale blue light of the screens, her expression unreadable. Dr. Shaw, Pierce said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Are the navigation algorithms stable? We are about to blind jump a massive fleet into hostile space. I need to know our FTL won't scatter us across the cosmos. The entanglement drives don't push us through space, Admiral, Shaw replied, her tone clinical and precise. They fold the dimensional plane around us. To the rest of the galaxy, it will look like we simply ceased to exist in Sol and instantly manifested at our destination. No light lag, no warp signatures. They won't see us coming until we are already in their skies. Perfect, Pierce murmured. He turned back to the galactic map. Set coordinates for the Sirius anchorage. It's the primary shipyard and forward operating base for the Trellian Ascendancy's outer rim fleets. If we take Sirius, we cripple their ability to stage a counteroffensive. We cut their empire in half. Lawson entered the command codes. Coordinates locked, sir. Pierce pressed the broadcast toggle, opening a fleet-wide channel. Millions of human sailors, pilots, marines, and engineers listened in absolute silence. Men and women of the Directorate, Pierce began, his voice carrying the icy weight of a century of suppressed wrath. Our ancestors died in the dirt so that we could build in the dark. The monsters who burned our world think they are the apex of this universe. Today, we show them that the universe belongs to the relentless. We do not conquer for glory, we conquer to survive. Execute, jump. Around the Sol system, space tore open. There was no flash of light, no cinematic streak of stars. 5,000 Terran warships simply vanished, leaving behind a wake of gravitational ripples that temporarily disrupted the orbits of Earth's remaining satellites. 8.6 light-years away, the Sirius anchorage was a marvel of Trellian engineering. It was a massive, ringed space station orbiting a blue dwarf star, surrounded by hundreds of dry docks, fuel refineries, and defensive platforms. Tens of thousands of Trellian engineers, military personnel, and administrators lived on the station, secure in the knowledge that they were the untouchable elite of the Galactic Concordat. In the command center of the anchorage, Klaxon suddenly screamed. The station's AI core shrieked in digital agony as sensors detected a catastrophic mass anomaly. Without warning, the void around the blue dwarf turned black. The human fleet dropped out of the dimensional fold in a perfect aggressive sphere, completely surrounding the Sirius anchorage. The sheer gravitational mass of 5,000 dreadnoughts arriving simultaneously caused the Trellian station to shudder, its internal gyroscopes screaming under the strain. Open fire, Pierce ordered calmly from his flagship. the Times UTS Vengeance. The opening volley was an exercise in absolute, localized destruction. The Terran fleet did not aim for the habitable zones of the station. They aimed for the infrastructure. Thousands of phase-shift kinetic slugs, moving at near-light speed, bypassed the Trellian deflector shields as if they didn't exist. The shipyards detonated in a chain reaction of blinding plasma. Trellian dreadnoughts that were still in dry dock, unpowered and defenseless, were atomized. The fuel refineries ruptured, sending massive shockwaves of burning hypermatter rippling through the vacuum, washing over the human ships, but doing nothing against their dark matter armor. "Launch the drone swarms," Captain Lawson commanded. From the bellies of the Terran cruisers, millions of autonomous fighter drones poured out like a swarm of metallic locusts. Engineered from the ancient heritage of Boeing and Lockheed Martin Black projects, these drones were networked through a central, predatory AI. They descended upon the Trellian defensive platforms, burrowing into their armor with plasma cutters and detonating their micro-singularity cores from the inside out. Within 12 minutes, the exterior defenses of the Sirius anchorage were completely annihilated. The Trellian military structure in the sector was effectively decapitated. Admiral Dr. Shaw reported from her console, her eyes tracking the energy signatures. The anchorage's main reactor is failing. Life support is dropping. They are completely immobilized. "Good," Pierce said. "Send in General Winston and the Marines. I want the station's databanks intact. I want their navigational charts, their concordant intelligence, and the access codes to their inner systems." On board the massive troop carriers, General Bradley Winston racked the slide of his magnetic accelerator rifle. He was clad in a massive suit of powered, mechanized armor, a terrifying evolution of the early exoskeleton prototypes built by Boston Dynamics and Northrop Grumman. Standing 8 feet tall, the armor was practically a walking tank, immune to standard plasma fire. "Drop pods go!" Winston roared into his comms. Thousands of black, teardrop-shaped pods shot out from the human ships, slamming into the hull of the Sirius station like meteorites. The pods breached the station's outer armor, exploding inward and unleashing the heavily mechanized Terran Marine Corps into the pristine, crystalline corridors of the Trellian base. The ground combat was a slaughter. The Trellian security forces, armed with elegant energy rifles and wearing ceremonial armor, were entirely unprepared for the sheer, brutal physicality of the human assault. Winston's Marines didn't just shoot. They utilized heavy, kinetic, suppressive fire, shoulder-mounted micromissiles, and brute force. They tore through reinforced blast doors, ignoring the plasma bolts that sparked uselessly against their dark matter plating. Winston personally led the charge into the station's central data nexus. He kicked the doors off their hinges, his massive armored frame filling the entryway. Inside, terrified Trellian administrators cowered beneath their consoles. Winston didn't fire. He merely walked to the central mainframe, plugged a decryption spike into the primary port, and watched as the human AI violently extracted every byte of data the Trellians possessed. "Admiral Pierce." Winston grunted over the comms, his voice distorted by his helmet's vocoder. "We have the data. The entire galactic map, concordat patrol routes, and the exact coordinates of the Trellian homeworld. It's all ours." "Excellent work, General," Pierce replied. "Pull your men back to the fleet. Leave the survivors on the station. Let them broadcast what happened here. Let the galaxy know that the march has begun." As the Terran Marines evacuated, Pierce ordered the fleet to realign. The destruction of the Sirius anchorage had taken less than an hour. The Trellian Ascendancy had lost 20% of its naval production capacity in a single stroke. Back in the Sol system, Dr. Samuel Aris, the head of Xenobiological Intelligence, was analyzing the data General Winston had captured. Aris was a man who understood the psychology of fear better than anyone. "Admiral," Aris said via secure quantum link from Earth, "I am reviewing the Concordat's intercepted communications. Panic is absolute. The Galactic Council is in an emergency session. They are demanding the Trellians stop us. But the Trellians are begging the Council for a combined armada." "Will the Concordat intervene?" Pierce asked, narrowing his eyes. "They might try," Aris replied, "but they are paralyzed by bureaucracy. We have paralyzed them with shock and awe. The Trellians are isolated. If we strike their homeworld now, the Empire collapses, and the Concordat will be forced to recognize us as the dominant power." Pierce looked out at the burning wreckage of the Sirius anchorage. The galaxy was bleeding, and humanity held the knife. Calculate the jump for Trelia Prime, Pierce ordered. We end this now. The sky above Trelia Prime, the glittering ecumenopolis and undisputed crown jewel of the Orion Arm, had not seen a hostile silhouette in over 10 millennia. The planet was a masterpiece of alien supremacy, encased entirely in shimmering crystalline spires, hanging atmospheric gardens, and engineered oceans tamed by weather control grids. It was shielded by a planetary defense matrix so advanced it was powered by 3 captive orbital microstars, forming an impenetrable, overlapping energy membrane. When the dimensional plane suddenly ruptured, tearing open the fabric of normal space with the violent, synchronized entry of 5,000 Terran dreadnoughts, the artificial daylight of Trelia Prime turned into a terrifying, shadowed eclipse. Panic swept across the global metropolis. Billions of Trellians, long accustomed to their status as the untouchable elite of the galaxy, looked up in paralyzed horror. The jagged, brutalist silhouettes of the human armada blotted out the sun. The vengeance of Earth had not just arrived at their doorstep, it had kicked the door off its hinges. Before Fleet Admiral Gregory Pierce could issue the order to break their defenses, a priority quantum transmission forced its way into the Times, UTS Vengeance's Times Primary Communications Array. It bypassed standard encryption, bleeding directly into the bridge's holographic projector. The image of a tall, elegantly robed alien materialized. The human translation software, utilizing deep learning linguistic models originally developed by the remnants of Palantir Technologies, immediately processed his frantic syntax. "Admiral Pierce," the figure pleaded, his voice trembling as he broke every protocol of concordant diplomacy. "I am High Ambassador Gideon. I beg you to hold your fire. The Ascendancy officially recognizes your military superiority. I am authorized to negotiate an immediate, unconditional ceasefire." Pierce stepped into the edge of the holographic field, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in the crisp, dark uniform of the Directorate. "A ceasefire, Ambassador Gideon? Where was your call for a ceasefire a century ago, when your dreadnoughts dropped kinetic rods on our fault lines? Where was your diplomacy when the Atlantic boiled and 2 billion humans drowned in the dark?" That was an unsanctioned tragedy," Gideon stammered, his multi-jointed hands raised in desperate supplication. "A brutal excess by a past administration. If you fire your singularity weapons on Trelia Prime, you will be committing absolute planetary genocide. You will become the very monsters you claim to despise." "We are not monsters, Ambassador," Pierce said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. "We are the invoice for your arrogance, and the bill is due." "Admiral!" Captain James Lawson shouted from the tactical pit, his fingers flying across the sensor displays. "Massive energy spikes detected beneath their planetary crust. They aren't surrendering." "The transmission is a stall tactic. They are spooling a massive chronal displacement array. If they fire, they could shift our entire fleet into a localized time loop." The twist was desperate and brilliant, a last-ditch superweapon the Concordat had legally banned centuries ago. But the Trellians had vastly underestimated human paranoia. Predictive AI foresaw a localized temporal distortion. Dr. Evelyn Shaw called out calmly from her engineering terminal, her eyes reflecting the crimson warning lights. "General Atomic's magnetic containment fields are already holding. We are insulated. But we need to shut down their power grid immediately." Pierce didn't even blink. He looked back at the terrified hologram of Ambassador Gideon. "You just sealed your own fate. Lawson, target their orbital microstars. Fracture the containment fields." Firing heavy phase shift railguns, Lawson confirmed, slamming his palm onto the execution relay. 3 massive kinetic slugs, forged from ultra-dense depleted uranium and accelerated to 99% the speed of light, tore through the vacuum. Because they were phase shifted, they slipped through the Trellan energy membrane as if it were made of thin air, re-entering normal space at the exact moment they intersected with the massive orbital power stations housing the captive stars. The containment fields shattered like glass. Without their magnetic restraints, the 3 microstars violently expanded, unleashing a devastating wave of raw solar fire that swept across the upper exosphere of Trelia Prime. The electromagnetic pulse was apocalyptic. The planetary defense grid overloaded in a blinding flash, cascading into a global blackout. In a matter of seconds, the crown jewel of the galaxy went completely dark. The hidden chronal displacement weapon, starved of power, whined and died in the crust. The planet was utterly defenseless. Pierce looked down at the silent, darkened world. He could give the order. He could unleash the Singularity warheads, crack the planetary mantle, and wipe the Trellian species from the annals of cosmic history. The bridge was dead silent. Every officer, every mechanized marine, every AI routine was waiting for a single word. General Bradley Winston's gruff voice crackled over the internal comms from the drop bay. We have firing solutions on their primary population centers. Give the word, and we turn them to ash. Pierce stared at the planet for a long, heavy moment. Stand down, General, he said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Lawson looked up, stunned. Sir, we are letting them live? Death is a mercy they have not earned, James, Pierce said coldly. Martyrdom is a luxury we will not provide. We are going to give them exactly what they gave us. Pierce keyed the global broadcast channel, overriding every remaining emergency battery-powered network on the surface of Trelea Prime. His face appeared on millions of small, flickering screens in the dark, panicked cities below. Citizens of the Trellian Ascendancy, Pierce announced. 100 years ago, you declared humanity a quarantined resource. You locked us in the dark. Today, the United Terran Directorate accepts your unconditional surrender. But we will not destroy you. Instead, you are forbidden from leaving your atmosphere. You are stripped of your FTL technology, and you will pay a tithe of labor and resources to Earth for the next 1,000 years. Pierce turned to Shaw. Doctor, engage the iron cage. From the cargo bays of the human science vessels, thousands of heavily shielded autonomous satellites launched into low orbit. They linked together, their fusion cores sinking in a brilliant web of light. A massive, localized space-time distortion field flared to life around the planet. It was an inverted version of the Aegis Protocol, a one-way mirror of hard light and gravitational anomalies. The Trellians could look out and see the stars, but they could never reach them. Any unauthorized ship attempting to breach the atmosphere would be instantly crushed by gravitational shear. The former masters of the galaxy were now prisoners on their own world. Weeks later, in the grand, crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council on neutral ground, the massive doors swung open. A human delegation arrived for the first time in history. They did not come as petitioners. They walked through the hallowed halls clad in crisp, dark uniforms, flanked by towering, 8-foot-tall, mechanized Terran Marines. Dr. Samuel Eris stood before the assembled, terrified alien senators. The United Terran Directorate does not seek the destruction of this Concordat, Eris stated, his voice echoing with cold authority. We will trade with you. We will coexist, but let the iron cage of Trellia serve as your eternal warning. If you ever cross our borders, if you ever threaten our home, we will turn off your skies, and we will put you in the dark. We are the architects of the new era, and you will not survive a war with Earth. Humanity had stayed silent for 100 years. They would never be silenced again. If you enjoyed this descent into the dark, relentless heart of human vengeance and our terrifying rise to galactic supremacy, do not let the transmission end here. Hit that like button to power our star drives. Share this epic HFY story with your fellow Terrans, and subscribe to the channel for more mind-bending sci-fi sagas. The universe is vast, the stories are endless, and humanity is just getting started. Join the Directorate today, and we will see you in the next transmission.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, humans stayed silent for 100 years, then one word started the greatest war in galactic history, _HFY sci-fi stories. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the mix of patience, resilience, and the weight of long-held determination. Beyond the battles, the story reminds us that preparation and unity can be just as powerful as strength itself, and that every choice made today can shape the future in ways we don't immediately see. Which scene had the biggest impact on you, and do you think humanity made the right decisions once the silence finally ended? If you were in their position, would you have chosen the same path, or looked for another way forward? One lesson I like to take into everyday life is that staying calm, learning, and preparing quietly can often matter more than reacting in the moment. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd really enjoy reading your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY adventures like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe for more stories here on Palace Truths.